We have people
Great.
now online watching us now. So welcome to our Thursday. I guess it's now becoming a regular author interview. And today I am talking to John H. Richardson, an esteemed journalist, writer, and a terrific writer. I'm going to read your bio quickly. Was a writer at large for Esquire for 18 years. Had many adventures, of which some are mentioned in this book, and is the author of My Father the Spy, The Little World, and The Viper's Club. His work has appeared in The Atlantic, the O. Henry Prize stories, The Best American Crime Writing, and The Best American Magazine Writing. He lives in New York. Today, we're going to talk about your book, which is just out, and it's the first book out of the gate on Luigi. It's called Luigi, The Making and the Meaning. And those of you, my subscribers who read my essay this week will be familiar with it because I mention it in a larger piece about revolutionaries, revolution, the concept of revolution in this era, and your book. I mentioned your book, and I had also seen the new Leo DiCaprio movie, which is really it's an adaptation of a Thomas Pynchon book called Vineland, which is about aging hippies on the run. And it's a terrific movie. This is a terrific book, very thought-provoking. And I just wanted to talk to you about it because I think, we're coming up on the anniversary of the shooting of the United Healthcare CEO, and he's been in jail for almost a year. So a timely book, also timely because of what's going on in our country, of course. And I think what I wanted to start off with, John, is just your decision to kind of. You're not doing the Bob Woodward book here. You're really doing something that I appreciate and I think should be done more with reportage about events like this, which is you put him in context of ideas and of other people like him. And I just wonder if you want to say anything about why you decided to approach it that way.
Well, I'd written this piece for New York Magazine 5 years ago called "Children of Ted," which was about young followers of Ted Kaczynski, which was a story that sort of came up on me. I wasn't out there looking for anything like that, but I just kept bumped into a couple of them over the years. And then I thought, well, this is weird, and started looking for them. And once I Googled, and once I met one, it just sort of pulls the thread, and you start meeting more. And I was sort of surprised that young folks were into Kaczynski. To me, he was just I didn't really follow his story particularly at the time. He was just like a terrorist, a killer with some weird environmental angle. That's about as much as I knew. And so, like, the first kid I heard talking about it was like a 19-year-old, just graduated high school, full of energy and very positive. And he was saying these things about Kaczynski, and I was like, but wait a second, he killed people. That was my reaction. It was totally clueless. And then I didn't think about it for a long time until I met another one. And then when I started to research it, then I had to research Kaczynski because I didn't know anything about him. And so I looked into his theories, and that was a bit of a shock, I have to say.
Why?
Over the course of the beginning of this century and the end of the 90s, my editors at Esquire assigned me to a lot of stories about the environment and technology. I did Craig Ventnor on the human genome. I spent time with climate scientists and people who were in protest movements and stuff like that, just different aspects of the thing from top to bottom. At one point, I went from literally from top to bottom, from the Fort McMurray in Canada, where they get the tar sands, all the way down to Texas, Port Arthur, where they refine the tar sands and then send them out to the world. So I was like reading, doing all that stuff, and it was beginning to seem pretty grim to me, looking at what the scientists were saying and all of that. And so
You're talking about the environment, and
the
basically
environmental
climate
and
change.
yeah, and
These are this climate scientists that you're
climate
talking.
scientists, and to a lesser extent, technology was like
Mhm.
seemed to be getting bigger and more in control of our lives. But I didn't have any way myself, way to think about it. So then, after meeting these kids, I started reading Kaczynski, and I had what I call the Kaczynski moment, which is like you're going, "Oh, this guy makes a lot of sense." And then part 2 is, "Oh, he's a killer. He's a terrorist serial killer." Um, uh, it's a pretty disturbing feeling to see sense in somebody who's done horrible things like that. So I started to try to work my mind around it, and that sort of led to that piece in New York.
Can you tell us a little bit about what parts of his manifesto? I guess it's the manifesto that you're talking about here, or is it
Right.
that you read and think, "Oh, this guy's I agree with this guy."
Well, the one
What is the main takeaway from that? It's
okay, well,
anti-civilizational,
yeah,
essentially?
he's basically saying that technology and industrial society is getting larger and larger and more in control of the system. Like we no longer control the system controls us, sort of thing. And one of the aspects in which it was shocking, and you see Kaczynski is this far-reaching guy, was he wrote this back in the 90s, early 90s, published it in 95, and he was talking about AI, and he said that when AI gets so smart that we don't understand how it's making its decisions, then we have the choice of whether we should let AI be in charge or whether we destroy it, which might not be that easy at that point. And I think we've sort of reached the
Yeah.
point where we don't really understand how AI is doing a lot of the things it's doing. Uh, we're not quite in the state where it controls all the systems, but that might be coming pretty quick, and I think it's alarming to people, and that he saw that 25, 30 years ago, gives him an authority. He's a mathematician. He's not a politician or a scientist with
Right. Well,
climate
and
scientists.
He was Harvard or Stanford? Harvard.
Harvard.
And wasn't he in the Timothy Leary acid tests?
No, not really.
Okay.
No, he was in a experiment, but it wasn't acid. But he, he but anyway, he was a math guy. He was not a environmental guy or a political guy or anything like that. He's sort of a pure logician, and I think he sort of figured out logically where the system would go. The other thing that he wrote a lot about was the loss of agency, and this was not something that I it's still not something I particularly relate to, but apparently a lot of other people do, especially younger people. The sense that you're in Luigi Manchone's world, uh, online world. It's the NPC theory, that we're just non-player characters in a video game that other people are playing, and we're just sort of standing there with blank expressions on our faces. And like I said, I've never felt that way, but I'm an old guy. Uh, Apparently, younger people feel more that way, and maybe some of it's being young, and some of it's being part of this system. I don't know. Anyway, I'm a reporter. I felt an echo of this Kaczynski view, and it resonates with me somewhat. But I'm still a little bit of a optimist. I still am for nuclear power and whatever can help solve our various problems so that we can move on. Um, I guess, but
The
but I
choosing, the
definitely
choosing to you were starting to say the choosing to center Luigi's sort of story in this milieu with this backdrop of who these people are. You start off with Ted, with Uncle. They call him
Mhm.
Uncle Ted, and
Right.
that he has suddenly these ideas that are appealing to you are also appealing to these younger people, and maybe in a different way. Does Uncle Ted? I mean, do the readers of Uncle Ted automatically agree that that killing people to solve this problem is a logical, reasonable way to react?
No, no, they don't. I think this is the problem that they face, is that, they're mostly uh interested in environment. That's where a lot of his followers come from. And I think typically what they go is they read it and they go, wow, this is real, and I can relate to everything he's saying, except for the solution. Like, why do
Mhm.
you? So, I mean, part of it, for I think, for some of them that I've talked to, is that the solution doesn't seem practical. It's like, how are you going to overthrow the system?
Mhm.
Uh, uh, and and what good does killing scientists or stuff like that do? They just don't
Mhm.
see an answer. And, maybe they're also revolted by violence or troubled by it. Some of them seem to intellectually want to approve of it, but I don't think they're actually violent people. Uh, so I think that was always for a lot of people, it's an intellectual thing, and then it's a place where you sort of stop and you're sort of left helpless,
Mhm.
which is also part of the problem. You don't want to be left helpless. So I think for me, it was always more like intellectual. I mean, if have
Mhm.
a just distance of a reporter, but think for the young people, they really felt it really hard, and for
Visceral.
them,
Yeah.
not being able to do anything was, for me, it's like, oh yeah, well, I'm used to not being able to do anything, but for them, it was more like existential. Like, I've failed. I failed
Mhm.
to save the world. Uh, yeah.
Okay, so that's Ted. You had you also had a personal interaction with him. You were writing to him and
Kaczynski, yeah.
you got to know him, and he got to know you. Um, you also sort of center the book, or center Luigi in this tradition of the eco terrorists, or eco movement,
Mhm.
extreme eco uh, collectives, like the Dark Mountain Collective and the Green, what is it? The Deep Green
Deep brain
Resistance.
resistance, yeah.
Um, talk about a little bit about those groups, because I think they're interesting, and the people who are behind them.
Okay, well, uh,
Deep Green Resistance is it's American, right? And
yeah. Oh, well, Deep Green
Dark Mountain is in the
Resistance.
UK.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Dark Mountain is the group that really sort of got me into this stuff, because it was founded by a environmentalist, a leading environmentalist, who had sort of dropped out of the movement and said that he was losing hope, that the movement wasn't going to do anything, there was no hope, and so he was moving to a farm in Ireland, uh, moving to the woods.
Mhm.
Um, and a whole group had coalesced around this. They were having festivals around the world. They were having, they're putting out beautiful books,
Mhm.
and they were basically trying to find a path forward in a world where they didn't have much hope for the big world. So they're trying to live in villages and farm and go back to nature, or just live in cities, and reduce their footprint and live ethically or whatever. But
Mhm.
basically, they had given up hope, and so that sort of is where I found some people talking about Kaczynski.
Mhm.
Um, S and then, Deep Green Resistance is quite a different group. It's an activist group in the United States that is dedicated to overthrowing the industrial system, much like Kaczynski wanted, and they've got a book called Deep Green Resistance that talks about how and whether and why and all of that. And they seem to be an active group that has retreats and things like that. When
But again,
I
those
went to one of their
groups,
retreats, and at that retreat there was probably about 30 or 40 people.
is that where they skinned rats to make dinner?
Yes, we skinned. Oh no, that was a whole different group. That was a place called Wild Roots, where people were learning primitive living skills like skidding rats and starting fires with sticks, and tanning bear hides with brains. It was fun. They were
Yeah.
a lively group of people with adventurous spirits.
And they're down in North Carolina, I think, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
But they were actually a surprisingly unusual group of people. One had been an engineer at a electric car company, and he had lost hope in the electric cars and that dream. One had been a intelligence analyst as a contractor for the military, so they weren't like just hippies. They
Yeah.
had careers and
Yeah.
had lost hope in some way. That was the place where I went, and they said, "There's only one rule here: don't talk about Ted Kaczynski."
Mm.
Yeah.
So these, I just your career, especially in this, you went to all these places, and you were steeped in this world already, and then you start, you get the okay to write this book about Luigi. Um, so why did you decide? Does he have any in your research into him? Does he have any connections to these type groups or to Uncle Ted? And talk to me about like what he actually was interacting with
Okay.
before he.
He had, the thing that made me initially click into him was that he wrote a review of Ted Kaczynski's manifesto, the Unabomber manifesto, and gave it 4 out of 5 stars, which really interested me, because I give it maybe 3 out of 5 stars. I mean, he's a little more generous. I think the writing style is annoying, a little bit too hammer like bang, bang, bang. But that's okay. That's Ted. But no, he gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I was like, well, so why'd you dock it a star? And at the time, he hadn't. The police were releasing dribs and drabs of Luigi's writings, and later on, 6 months later, they released some more that was much more explicit, where he criticized Kaczynski, he explained why he gave him those bad stars. That bad star, and he basically said you can't knock the guy for his predictions. His predictions were pretty accurate. Um, but in the original review and subsequently, well, there was, he did say his actions were bad, but later he said in these papers that prosecutors released 6 months into his jail tenure, he said Kaczynski was a terrorist, the worst thing a person can be, quote, uh, because he he killed individual people who had the most tenuous connection. They were a computer store owner or a
Mhm.
scientist at a university. Uh, um, so by killing,
How long before he shoots Brian Thompson is he writing that?
oh, just months.
Interesting.
Presumably in the 3 months when he was between August, or a few months when he disappeared, and then came onto the scene to shoot. But the consequences were pretty significant, because the the papers seem to indicate that he used thought about using a bomb, which would, you can leave a bomb like in an office or something, or mail bomb, which is what Kaczynski did, but that somebody innocent might get killed or hurt, which is what happened with Kaczynski. People opened the packages who were like the housekeeper, and then got their hands blown off. So he thought about that. Luigi thought about that and said, "No, that's not right." And I think, a lot has been made of the assassin-like way that he seems to have, shot him on the street. But if you flip that, he used a gun. He got close. He didn't shoot a spray of gunfire, machine gun fire from across the street so that he could make a faster exit or something. He took these like when you step out into the street, there might be a cop just turning around the corner who'll pull out your gun and shoot at you. He did take on extra risks so that he wouldn't hurt anybody except for Thompson. And so I think the way he looked at it, he was a revolutionary striking, a general in the opposite army rather than a terrorist killing random people to make a point. Maybe you don't think that's an important distinction, but to Luigi it mattered, and it shows that he's trying to make moral choices, I think, which is, interesting. Uh, Go on.
Well, we're talking about a generation below ours, right? This is our
Right.
children's generation, or even, well, my children are this age. And you do talk a bit about, the challenges that this generation has faced in terms of, growing up in the era of school shootings and the
Mm,
apocalyptic sort of warnings about climate change and so on. But I mean, you and I grew up in I wasn't duck and cover age, but the nuclear, the Reagan years were,
mm,
I mean, thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of nuclear weapons aimed at each other, which we don't talk about anymore, but which is still part of the dark background of our
mm,
lives. And I remember being extremely nihilistic. I wasn't about to blow up anybody, but I was in college extremely nihilistic about the future
mm.
and about, those years. And I wonder if we can talk a little bit about, this man and his act, and inspired, right? You've inspired fans,
Mm.
legion of fans. And I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about how, is this why do we look at this generation and say, oh my God, they've got it so bad, right? This is really bad, like compared
Mm.
to what we went through
Right,
and
right.
or went through, or the our time. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts on that, because I want to get from that to talking about Rod Dreher and the Nazi Gen Zers in Washington that we sort of need.
Oh boy,
Like, is there
Nazis.
something happening in that generation that's more likely to result in this kind of extreme behavior? And are the revolutionaries going to rise out of this generation in a way that they didn't in our years?
Yeah, that's a deep question. I'm not really qualified to answer it, but I will say that, I graduated high school and had to go register for the draft for Vietnam.
Mhm.
Um, and that felt pretty existential. But and yeah, I mean, there was the nuclear stuff. I guess because I didn't grow up in the States as much,
Yeah.
I missed a lot of that stuff. So I don't feel that. So I can't really speak to that. But it definitely seems to me that, with climate change, feeling pretty existential. And then when you layer on AI, especially for the people of Luigi's generation, that's a very real thing, and scary. And maybe it'll all turn out for the best, fine. And like I didn't end up having to go to Vietnam. Things worked out. I squeaked through. But, um, but, uh, I think it feels more that way, and
Mhm.
globalism, I think, kicks in. One thing I haven't talked about enough is income inequality, which I think is huge for these kids. Uh, it's like things are really tight. Like when I was a young guy, I got a college loan to go to grad school, $5,000 a semester. You know, I could afford that. I paid that off in a couple of years, with a job making 18 grand when I got out of school. Nothing, even in those days. But yeah, no, it seems like it's really, income inequality, climate change. AI, I don't know. There's other stuff, right? The seventh extinction. I don't know if, like, I was on a phone on the TV with somebody at Fox, and they were like, "Well, this is doomerism," and I was like, "Well, but you talk about the same stuff. It's not doomerism when you talk about it somehow. Maybe they don't talk about climate change, but they sure talk about AI and all that stuff. I mean, we're all talking about it because it's what's happening. Um, whether it's valid or whether it seems to be real and deep. So that's what matters. And as far as Thompson and all of that, my first thought, to be perfectly honest, was Luigi. Damn, it was an act of genius, because I've been talking to Kaczynski about his strategy and trying to convince him, or just arguing with him, because I was trying to get an interview, so I was trying to keep him talking.
Mhm.
So I was like, his latest thing was to attack the nodes of critical infrastructure, like refineries and turbines and stuff. And I'm like, that's not going to work. We had World War II. We rebuilt in a couple of years, 10 years, and we were good to go. That it's just not going to work, Ted. Um, and then when I saw the shooting of Thompson, it was like, because I'd been thinking what would work, just so I could argue with him. And it never occurred to me to hit a healthcare executive. And I thought, well, what's the most hated person in America? The head of healthcare, who decides whether you live and die. And he's also the largest healthcare insurance, who's been using AI to kick people off their healthcare. you know, uh, it's. I was like, wow, if this kid was really trying to think, why not give Ted 5 stars? And this was all in my head. It probably bears very little resistant relations to reality, but it was what got me interested. I was like, wow, strategically, tactically rather, maybe he thought about what Ted was up to and came out with a tactic that would rouse the people.
And do
Uh,
you think that now, John, now that you've done all this research and looked at you tried to communicate with them, or you
yeah,
did? Yes. What do you think now about you at the end, you end with this comment about Robin Hood, that Robin
yeah.
Hood flies in.
Honestly, I'm not sure whether Luigi bought into the whole Ted philosophy, because he does seem to have been a bit of a techno optimist, as far as sharing my feelings about climate change, about nuclear power,
Mhm.
about lab grown meat. He wasn't a doomer when it comes to technology, as so far as I can see. Even on AI, his attitude, maybe it changed towards the end, but his attitude seemed to have been like, could be horrible, could be pretty cool. Let's see how it turns out, and let's be very wary. Uh, that's one of the things. He seems to be pretty sensible in his evaluations of things. So maybe his interest really was healthcare and income inequality. I
Mhm.
mean, he made a deal in one of his notes about having done the shooting, assuming he did the shooting and he's not taking the fall for somebody else or some other thing, because he is innocent until proven guilty. But you know, assuming he did the shooting, he did. He said in his notes that he did it at the annual Bean Counters conference, and
Mhm.
that's where they're deciding whether they make a pitch for investors. This is how we're going to cut costs and save money this year, and so please invest in our company. So Luigi was apparently trying to call attention to that whole financialization of life and death. That's a pretty potent issue. And as you know, he got extraordinary reaction from the public, and that one incredibly shocking poll that seems to have been a pretty substantial poll that showed like 40% of young people thinking that's okay. What you did is fine. That shows a level of anger and frustration that I mean,
And those young people weren't just in New York City,
it's pretty scary.
where they've elected Mamdani.
Yeah.
They're not just in New York.
It's
That's
not
pretty
just in New
strong.
York. And here's where you get into the other aspect is like you asked about environmentalists and radical action and stuff like that. And the truth is, I quote a study in the book that did an analysis of like all the violence that's occurred um, in and found that there's a theory called the peaceful environmentalist, that environmentalists do not kill people. And this scholar found that it's pretty much true that there's been almost, aside from Ted Kaczynski, there's been almost no associations between environmental and killing. They do sabotage. They like to, destroy tractors and stuff like that, but they don't kill people. And it's pretty obvious why. They think nature is sacred and life is sacred and stuff like that. That's what, Luigi becomes interesting in this history of environmental violence or radical violence because he's
Radical
not,
violence from the left,
yeah,
because
because
he's associated with the left.
yeah, because he's not really a full-on leftist. Like I said, he's pro-nuclear power, he's
Technology. Hmm.
technology to some extent. He's cautious. Uh, So, and he listens to a lot of right wing influencers. He's retweets stuff that suggests that he's sympathetic to gender critiques, and that kind of thing. And he listens to Joe Rogan, which is he's just a dude. He's a guy of his generation and age who seems pretty. I have my son-in-law to be is teaches at a private school. He's went to an integrated school and all of that, and he listens to Joe Rogan. He listens to that's the world they live in. No, I didn't say that very well. A liberal kid, but listens to all a lot of different inputs and takes it in. That's sort of what Luigi was like. So it's possible that he slips by the peaceful environmental thesis because he doesn't really fit into the left wing paradigm, and that raises a question about that 40% that's backing him. I really think that is bipartisan. The evidence that, at the time was that it was bipartisan. And even if it isn't, what is true is that all these kids, right wing and left wing, however they define themselves, are living in this world, that they're facing the same issues, and they may be orienting themselves with more or less hope or more or less, activism or whatever. But some of them are just, quietly suffering, and others are making noise. But I kind of feel like I said, started out saying, I don't feel like I never felt a lack of agency. I always felt like I was going to do whatever the hell I wanted to do. I
Right, but
felt that I
you
felt,
didn't come of age in the era of agentics,
yeah. Well, but
which
also
we talked about yesterday.
I felt there were obstacles, but I never felt a problem with agency. I felt there were people and things in my way that I had to conquer. But maybe that's a different attitude.
Yeah, you mentioned Rod Dreher in passing, en passant here. I don't know if you want to talk about this or not, but I think that one of the things, so many things have happened this week. We should be talking about Epstein emails, but we're talking about this. So many things have happened politically, and one of them is this sort of breakdown in the MAGA movement in Washington between out Nazi white supremacists,
Mhm.
and they sort of, whatever they called themselves before before they got upset about their Nazis,
Yeah.
wing of the MAGA movement. And you see this guy Rod Dreher, who I think you mentioned had some interaction at one time with. He's a trad calf who's like moved to Hungary to be around more conservatives, and he was in Washington, and he got very upset and wrote this piece last week about how many Gen Z Nazis there are, and anti-Semites,
Yeah.
and how they're openly anti-Semitic. And he manages to write the whole article without once mentioning Gaza, which I find interesting because I think the Gaza situation actually does unite the left and the right in this sort of moment for these younger people. I think that they're on their phones all the time. They're looking at things. I think that maybe is part of what's going on. But um, I just wonder whether we're at this point where the Gen Z, the people who are sort of coming out of the woodwork for Luigi, as you said, are actually bipartisan, and that there is this sort of revolutionary moment that maybe is, I don't know. I mean, you used the word Robin Hood at the end. I'll give you the last word on that. Like, what is the meaning? You've got the making here. What is the meaning of Luigi?
Well, you know, I don't, I'm a reporter, not a commentator. Uh,
Did you come up with the title, or did the
I did not come up with the title,
Yeah,
but I think, I
they
think
title their own books. I know that.
the meaning's in there. I just don't like to state things, but I guess if I were going to say something like you brought up Rod Dreher, and this kind of, it's a good article, and Dreher is in my book because he's teamed up with the head of Dark Mountain, who's this
Mhm.
disenchanted liberal, and they're both on the same wavelength now. They're both Orthodox Christians who sort of turned to a God in the because they just became so hopeless. So maybe that's what the younger generation will do too. I don't know, but um, I think to me the danger, the danger of Luigi is that uh, it's hard to figure out how to say these things, but look, when the I think of it for some reason, grown-ups keeps coming into my mind, but this is not a good way to put it. But when the grown-ups don't do their jobs, the kids got to do something. And I feel like when I first started talking to those kids about Ted Kaczynski, it was like uh, I was touched by their sense of responsibility. They were like, "Well, if this is true, I got to do something." And I'm like, no, you don't. You're 20 years old. You go to school, get a job, have kids. Don't.
Yeah.
But but I was touched. I was moved that they felt this responsibility. And everybody thinks they're awful, evil kids if they do something violent. But I think, well, with Luigi, certainly I can see his motivation seems to have been trying to be helpful. Yes, he did something terrible, and it's a tragedy for his family and for the family of the victim. Um, but I think he was trying to be helpful. And that's easy for me to see because he's code's a little bit more liberal, and I can relate to a lot of the things he seems to have been interested in. Not all of them, obviously. When it comes to the people who shoot up synagogues and churches, my sympathies are less engaged, and I tend to see them as more monstrous. Uh, but the point is like 30,
Well, but I
40,
mean,
50 years
but
ago.
just remember that Trump, a young man about the same age, aimed a bullet at Trump and
Right.
killed a fireman, and
That's true.
then you've got the young guy out in Utah who made a martyr out of Charlie Kirk.
Right. And there's
Um,
and Melissa Hartman and all those. Yeah.
mhm.
So my point is that when somebody when the point isn't, do I understand their motivations? We all want to see what radicalized them, what made them go crazy,
Mhm.
because we have kids, we don't want our kids to go crazy or do something. But But if they're all doing different things, if one is shooting Charlie Kirk and another is shooting Trump and another is shooting Thompson, and one seems to code left and one seems to code right and one seems to just code crazy, what do you make?
Mhm.
The real takeaway is that the permission structure has changed. And somehow, when I was a kid, maybe a few people would do that. There'd be people already on the fringe, people who were really troubled, who did come into prison, would join the Symbionese Liberation Army or something like that. But but the average kids, certainly kids who went to Penn State and University of Pennsylvania and have a great future and a great family behind them, didn't do these sort of things very often. Now it's some people would always peel off, but now a lot of people seem to be peeling off.
Mhm.
And it's part of, I also resonate to that school shooter generation. I think those kids are trying to tell us something. They're saying, oh, we're supposed to feel sorry for the CEO who gets killed. We had to do drills, we had to do active shooter drills. Something like 500,000 of us have actually been in a shooting. So, yeah, I mean, I never did an active shooter drill.
Yeah,
So
neither did I.
so I
We
can't
didn't.
judge. But I feel like if I did, my sense of confidence in the law and order and sense that the grown-ups were taking care of business would be pretty limited. And, it was already pretty limited back in 1973 when I, you know, was a kid, but, out of high school. But, um, but,
Yeah. Well,
so that's my takeaway. It's not like, is this killer I don't agree with, this killer seems to be a sensible fellow. It's more like, why do so many young people feel like the grown-ups aren't doing their job? And then don't blame the young, blame the grown-ups.
okay.
I'll
Well,
take the blame.
we'll take the blame. John,
What a
thank you
world.
so much. Yeah, what a world. Thank you so much for coming on and revealing, the thoughtful way that you've approached this man's story and what happened. There's just so much public trauma in our, that's a part of what's going on here. I mean, everything is online.
Wow.
Everything is on
Interesting.
video in live, right? The Gaza stuff, the shooting of Charlie Kirk, the everything.
Hmm.
You can go, and so I think that, that's part of what, to me, that's part of what the public trauma and the political uses of public trauma is something that I'm really interested in. So I
Hmm.
really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about this, and it's just an important book, and it's super readable. Everyone who's listening, here it is. Luigi, The Making and the Meaning. And John, thank you
Thanks.
so much for
Thanks,
coming.
Nina. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you take care. Good luck with the book and all
Okay.
all things.
All
Okay.
right.
Goodbye. See you next week, everybody.
It's all.